ist unerbittlich. Er ist investigativ. Er geht der Sache auf den Grund. Herzlich willkommen bei Chris geht der Sache auf den Grund.
Episode 2 of Chris Investigates. Today it's a pleasure for me to welcome the designer of the board game Battlestations, Jeff Siadek. Hi Jeff, how are
you?
Nice to meet you.
It's great to be here.
Thanks. Yes, we're very happy to have you here. And well, let's get right into it. And I'd mostly like to talk about Battlestations and its standalone expansion Dirtside. But staying at the base game for the moment, how would you describe Battlestation to someone who has never played it or even ever heard about it? And there are too many people who didn't.
Yes. I would fire my marketing guy, but it's me, so I don't have a choice. Well, interesting. Depending on who I'm speaking to, if I'm talking to like my mother-in-law, then I would say Battlestations is sort of like Dungeons and Dragons in space. But if I'm talking to a real gamer, then I would say it's somewhere along a hybrid between Starfleet battles and maybe a D20 space role-playing game. So that's kind of where it fits into. Its particular niche is that you've got your characters on a starship, and your starship is moving around on the hex map. So it simultaneously integrates the ship-to-ship and the boarding action. So many role-playing games, when you say, okay, we've got a starship, it's kind of roll a d20 and add some numbers and hope. Whereas in Battlestations, it goes to a hex grid where your ship is really matters. And the difficulty to shoot something is based on the distance, and the difficulty to turn is based on your speed. So you really do feel like you're flying a starship around, which kind of harkens it to more of the board gamey Starfleet Battles kind of stuff. And then but because your character's sitting in a module on the ship, then that makes an impact of literally an impact when your ship gets shot. If you're standing in the helm when the helm gets shot, then you've got personal damage to track. And so then it's suddenly like a role-playing game where you say, oh, my character's unconscious. Can somebody come heal me? So it's really and I'm really shocked that it hasn't been done by anybody else still even. I thought somebody was going to eat our lunch, but we've been at it since 2004, and nobody's really made a successful starship action game that's driven by the character actions.
Yeah, fine. And what makes Battlestation so outstanding for me is this book, this huge book, which with the optional rules, it's becomes one of the most tactical games I've played, and one of the board games which is nearest to a RPG in a box than I know, and that's fantastic. It's a great experience. But what interests me is, did you have all this in mind when designing Battlestations, or was it like, one thing led to another, and then?
Yeah, it is kind of that. It's kind of the boiled frog syndrome. That if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you put a frog in water and start boiling it, it'll just cook itself. And so Battlestations originally was, I think, about 15 pages when I first tested it. And as I added more as I went along, and there's a real danger in that with your playtesters because they all learn the game as they go along. So now, that 300-page book you held up, if you were to walk into a group of newbies and say, okay, guys, here's the 300-page rule book we're going to play, they'd run in terror. But really, it's about, of those 300 pages, most of it is scenarios and equipment that you don't have. Like, you don't need the rules for a disintegrator unless you're going to be facing one, and then suddenly they're super important. And so the idea is that it's the basic skin of the game, or the basic guts of the game, really, is you're rolling 2 dice against a target number. You get to move, and you get to act. And then what that can do based on where you are in the ship, if you're in the missile bay, you can launch a missile. If you're in the helm, you can speed up or slow down. And if you're in the teleporter, you can teleport a bomb to the enemy ship or yourself to the enemy ship. So it's all relatively simple, but there's so many different simple things you can do that it starts to to multiply and get complex. And that's so it really started simple, and then as I go along, the more stuff we want to do, and you want to say, like, what about grenades? And that, incidentally, grenades was a real crisis, because on the one hand, I want everybody to be able to do everything. If you want grenades or time travel or whatever in your game, do it. But there's a real risk that when you're throwing a grenade, if it's too effective, then everybody says, oh, forget these blasters, I'm just going to throw grenades. But if it's ineffective, then everybody says, oh, why bother with grenades? So I kind of try to find that happy balance between, where sometimes, oh, yeah, there's a room full of guys, let's throw a grenade in. Or there's just one dude there, I'm going to shoot him with my blaster. So yeah. It's really it's a constant struggle of how much detail to add, and whether it's enough. Like in the new Dirtside game, all the vehicles are considered vehicles, and so there's some standard rules about how vehicles work, but then they're different based on whether it's a jet vehicle or a wheeled vehicle. So you'll have slightly different rules, but it's mainly, okay, roll the dice and that's how far you go, and then it's adjusted by what you're doing. So it's a constant thing.
Okay, let's come to Dirtside. What's Dirtside's addition to the system?
So Dirtside takes that same basic mechanic and brings it down to a planetary level. So instead of ships on a hex map, you've got characters on a square grid of the land mass of roughly a large city. And so in the Dirtside missions, well, one other thing that's different about Dirtside is that it's unmoderated. So you don't need a moderator. You can play it just out of the box. And the thing, it's the mechanics of flying a ship. And I've scaled it slightly because to fit a whole city, you need to have a lot more space. So instead of the movement in Battlestations, there's the number of squares that you move around on the modules of the starship. In Dirtside, the squares represent a bigger area, so everybody can move 2 spaces. But the super fast creatures like the Cheetah-oid or a Whistler that has an extra puff move, they can move 3 spaces. So it's a way, and some of the detail gets lost because in the original game, when I was balancing, say, a Silicoid, he's a little slower, but they're much more defensive. They're these rocky guys who stop damage. So I was able to fudge with, they have a few more hit points or a few less hit points, and they can move a few more squares or a few less squares. Well, when I went to Dirtside, the number of spaces you can move is 2 spaces. So suddenly a lot of the stuff where I fudged a little bit this way or that way, I said, oh, Silicoids will be a little slower. I didn't want to have them move only 1 space because that's just debilitating. And so I had to say, okay, so everybody gets to move 2. So consequently, they get a little bit of a bump in Dirtside, which although, because a lot of Dirtside is pick up and delivery, the missions are all on a planet. So you're doing a lot of picking up and delivering and that sort of thing. So the Silicoid's one-handedness really is a hampering factor there. So that kind of worked out a little bit to my benefit. Okay.
You said it's unmoderated. Can you tell us something about the AI the enemies need to have then?
Yes.
How does it work?
Essentially, there's the enemies are going to try to attack the nearest hero with the most firepower they can muster. So if they're standing in a cannon installation, they'll fire a cannon at you. If they're not, they'll try to get to one, or if the closest thing is they can walk up and shoot you with their blaster, they will. And there's a series of things like they won't shoot into if you're in the room with another enemy, they won't blast that room with a cannon because they don't want to kill their friends. So which means strategically sometimes you'll not kill off the last guy in a room so that the guys with the cannons don't shoot you, and then go on Overwatch and do it next turn.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So and if they don't have somebody if they don't have anybody to get to, like your ship hasn't landed yet, then they'll move towards the middle of the map. And that's just the grunts behavior. There's villains who are like the equivalent of enemy heroes. They have better skills and whatnot. And there's also hordes, which there's twice as many of them, but they only have 1 hit point. So they're just that way, instead of having just an enemy crew, you've got a range of different things. Plus there's offboard missiles, or a lot of it, roughly half of it, doesn't include enemies at all, but sort of offboard missiles or drones or things that are not but generally the enemies just shoot at you. And one of the things from Battlestations, the AI for that isn't as clean as I would like, because making decisions about whether to accelerate your ship and when to turn and that sort of thing is a lot more, it's a lot harder to address than a simple sort of like in a dungeon crawl where you say, oh, all the orcs are going to move towards the heroes and shoot them. That makes sense. But if you're on a starship and you're 12 hexes away, do you accelerate now and then decelerate 3 phases later so you're close enough to land on the planet? And these are the kinds of things that an enemy AI it's hard to write for that. Having said that, on the planetary surface, it's relatively simple. Bad guys are going to be out to get you. So.
Okay. How long did you work on the AI?
It's an ongoing thing. It's still even the other day I was still making notes about whether the grunts, there's vehicles on the planet, and will sort of the idiot sort of lowest level. I imagine it's just a grunt just walking out the door saying, "Hey, I'm going to fight these guys." They're not going to get into a vehicle and drive it around. They don't have the wherewithal for that. So it was to have an AI took me maybe a week to figure it out, and then to get it better. Every time I iterated, it gets better and better. Because if I look back at my early rules, there was weird stuff where they wouldn't shoot you, or if you went in a certain way, so you could have them chasing you around the block, kind of nonsense. And as it goes on, it gets better.
Including Benny Hill music. Yeah.
Yes.
So Dirtside is in development still?
It is so close to done that it's frightening, and that actually it's literally frightening, because once I release it, then I have to have the world judge it. So I kind of drag my heels a little bit on it. I mean, I'm still working at it, but there's little fine points, and I find an extra parentheses in some paragraph or something. So I couldn't have let it go with that. But I mean, eventually you just have to let it go and say, yeah, out of 200 pages, there's going to be a couple of typos or whatever, and be done.
Yeah, of course. Do you have an estimate when the beginning of production could start?
It will go into production within a month, and it will be released this summer. Absolutely. Wow. Yeah,
that's good news. I wasn't sure about the Kickstarter updates. What was the last news? But this is really good news. And happy to hear that.
Everything done. It's just a matter of getting the final tweaks. And see, every time I tweak things, then I have to send it back to the art guy and have him make sure I didn't push the margins too far when I was changing my, that kind of stuff.
Okay, really cool. Let's talk a bit about Jeff Siadek.
All right.
The simplest question, of course, how did you become a board game designer? What was the idea, your motivation?
Well, when I was young, I wanted to be a comic book writer. That was the first thing I wanted. And then when I was, I guess, about 13 years old, a friend brought over the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook by Gary Gygax. And it literally changed my life. It's the most influential book in my life. And I said, instead of just, because, me and my brother and, my family, we'd play games, moving pieces around on the map and whatever. But when you said, oh, you could be a hero inside a dungeon shooting your crossbow and, different swords and different things, and it all just was awesome. And the great thing, too, is I was so young at that time, and the industry was so young, that I didn't realize what a bad game Dungeons & Dragons was or is. I mean, it was the best in the world because it was the only in the world. And, you look back and say, why would anybody use a short sword for a D6 of damage when you use a long sword for a D8? And there's no difference. Yeah. So that started me on this path of I made a game where the sword that did a D6 of damage was faster to wield than a D8. And it was just an elaborate thing and a lot of complicated stuff, but it was sort of the thing I needed to go through to get to where, what details are worth putting in and what details aren't. And so that's kind of, and then after I kept with the design work and eventually got some stuff published by Steve Jackson Games. The Auto Duel catalog of Uncle Albert's catalog, and I read that, loved it. So I wrote 150 ideas in a book and sent it to him, thinking he's going to publish my book. And they were very kind. A month or two later, they sent back, a check for $25 and said, "We used 5 of your ideas. Here you go." And I thought I was going to be a published author of a whole book. I didn't realize. But among them was the Mind Flinger. It throws mines out like a frisbee, so that kind of got me my feet wet, and then I was designing stuff, and really a shyness that I have about not wanting to sell my games to a publisher made me go into publishing myself, which is just absolutely foolish, because instead of selling to a publisher, now I have to sell to all the consumers and the buyers for game. You don't get out of sales by not selling to a publisher. You just have to change who you're selling to.
Yeah.
So,
I understand.
and the other thing too is that I wanted to have more control over it. That when you have when somebody else is publishing, then they get to say what happens with it, and you get a bigger piece of the pie when you publish yourself. But of course, I'm getting a bigger piece of a smaller pie. Many people have told me, hey, you should sell this game out to a bigger company and they can do it right and you'd get more money. But I think I want to control it. I want to have the power and. Yeah,
I understand. Absolutely. When you find some time to play games yourself and not designing them, do you have favorite board games?
Terraforming Mars is my current. I love that game. It's beautiful. And I also have been liking Wingspan a lot lately. And one of my all-time favorites is Titan. It's just that's incredible. And I also like whatever's new. I like new stuff, getting dragged into stuff when friends say, Gloomhaven. I've been playing Gloomhaven online. And incidentally, during the pandemic, one of the side benefits, I guess, is that one of my best friends, Sean Garrity, is up in Winnipeg. And because we're all playing, I had been playing a local Gloomhaven game, but because of the pandemic, we're all shut down in our own homes. And I said, well, as long as we're doing it remotely, might as well have my buddy from Winnipeg join us. So I get to see more people that I don't usually get to see, even if it's in sort of a not as good way.
That's cool, but interesting that you named mainly or mostly Euro games and designing yourself an RPG in a box.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, my design really at Battlestations is sort of my life's work, I guess, at least thus far. But my design tends to go a little more Euro for other stuff, like Lifeboat is the other game I might be known for. And Palaces is my most recent game that's very Euro. And it just absolutely crushed me when I released it and hardly anybody cared. And so I went back to lick my wounds and, do more Battlestation stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. And I hope there's other plans beyond Dirtside.
Yes. So the next thing I am thinking about doing is I'm calling it Battlestations Lightspeed. It's essentially Battlestations, but stripped down, much lighter, cleaner, so that you can play it with your kids. The idea is that somebody who says, oh, I like Star Wars or I like Star Trek, I want to play a game like that. And then when you break out the dice and say, here, add the +1 and the +3 and all that stuff, their eyes glaze over. I want to get to the point where you say, okay, I'm going to shoot my blaster. Okay, roll these dice and get a 9. That it's simple and zips along through. So that's the next thing. And I've got a couple of other Battlestations projects that are, one of them, A Trillion Souls, give or take, is it's a Battlestations adventure in a universe where they didn't succeed in saving the planet a bunch of times. So there's, how there's all these dead planets and these worlds that it's kind of haunted, and it's a whodunit, and I'm really happy and excited about it. I've tested it 3 times now, and every time I test it, it gets better. But I also find that the amount of, I'm trying not to lay out the cards too much, but I keep holding back too much. So I'm trying to figure out, give enough clues that they stay engaged and figure out where it's going. Because I never want to say, okay, well, here's the butler did it, and have it just be, oh, the butler did it. But and somehow I end up on the other end of that spectrum where they, by the end of it, they say, wait, there was a butler? Like, oh no, I probably should have had that, but there's a butler there first.
Okay,
Anyways,
yes. Please. Yeah, sounds interesting. We'll have an eye on that.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Jeff. Thanks a lot for being with us. It was a great joy for me. It was really fun. All the best for Dirtside, for productions. May everything go smooth. And thanks for the big news. We'll have it this summer.
Yep.
Yes. And have a great day and stay healthy. Thanks. Many thanks, Jeff.
Well, thank you. It's certainly been a lot of fun to be here talking to you.
Many thanks. Bye.
Bye.